really Holy Thursday, Good Friday, leading up to the Easter Vigil are very spiritual services. And on Holy Thursday, we remember the institution of the Holy Eucharist, the first Mass, the Last Supper, and then on Friday, of course, the crucifixion of our Lord and his burial, and then we have a time of prayer on Saturday, Holy Saturday, and then, of course, the Easter Vigil will begin at 8 p.m. on Saturday evening, and we'll begin outside with a great fire. I was just cleaning up my little shop a few days ago and gathering up all my scrap wood and everything for the Easter fire. It's always a great, it's something that I look forward to. Hopefully it won't rain, because that doesn't help too good with the fire. I tried that one time, and the Easter fire doesn't usually go too good on the rain, but most of the time it hasn't been a washout for us. Here's a deacon. And there's a deacon, my goodness. We got bookends here. Deacon John, from his 40-plus years in ordained ministry, and Deacon Joe in his first year. Well, we still have a couple minutes, and I think we will get a couple more here in the next few minutes. So I'll go ahead and ask Deacon John, as he's our next one up. Are you going to be in town next week? Okay. And you're prepared. Is your neck better?
What?
Is your neck better?
Yes, now I can do this.
Okay.
All right,
Okay. Okay.
huh? Yeah, but that's...
Okay. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. So welcome to all of you. Welcome to any of our viewers on the online streaming service, or those who will follow up with the YouTube channel. Our topic this evening is the 10 Commandments, and really not only just learning these 10 Commandments, but also in a sense, an application into a Christian life. I'm going to begin with a passage from the book of Deuteronomy. This is from Deuteronomy 30, beginning around verse 16. And this is Moses speaking. If you obey the commandments of the Lord, your God, which I enjoin on you today, and walking in his ways and keeping his commandments, statutes, and decrees, you will live and grow numerous. And the Lord your God will bless you in the land you are entering to occupy. So he's basically saying, if you follow these, if you obey them, you will have life. And not only life, but you will have prosperity. You know, it could be a sense of a spiritual prosperity. It's not in a sense necessarily of material. Basically, the follow-up to that verse is if you don't, basically you're doomed, you know. So it's better to follow the precepts and the commandments and the law of the Lord. I can remember when I was in the seminary, there was a very popular, very wealthy entrepreneur was asked something about it, and he said, well, wasn't that the 10 suggestions? I said, no, I think it is the 10 commandments. In your UCAT Catechism, the section begins on question 349. And again, they follow up with a concise application of each commandment, kind of what I'm going to do today, but since we're in kind of a compact session today, it'll be even more concise. Also, the Catechism of the Catholic Church, which you could just see the difference in size of these two books. This is based on the Catechism, but it's very concise. The Catechism is like the encyclopedia, and there is a very detailed and a very complete section on each commandment. And so if you don't have a copy of this book, you don't have to buy one because it is available online in numerous websites, including EWTN, the Vatican website, and even some parishes have it, and the bishop's website as well, the bishops of the United States. So you can, and plus to the online version is you can look up a search, you can search for it, and this has an index in it as well. But like if you're traveling, that might put your suitcase over the limit right there. It's a pretty good book. You have, I'm sure, lots of law books and things too. But the Catechism, when it came out about 30 years ago or so, the Pope John Paul II at the time, when it was promulgated, he recommended that every Catholic home have a copy of it. This was before all the online things were available. But that's certainly very good. And again, this is very handy as it's very lightweight and it's a concise version. Okay, so Tracy, if you could help me with the handouts. And again, there's a lot of information. So what we're going to do today is just try to hit the highlights. It's not to say that we're going to skip anything that's vital, but the whole sessions are an invitation for you to do some study on your own. Like right from this UCAT book, starting at 349, you can do some study on your own on the 10 Commandments. Or you can look online to the Catechism, or you can even go to your Bible and look in the footnotes. And so anyway, that's some of the options that you have before you. I'm going to read much of this tonight because it's not that much material. And again, I do invite you to continue your study and your knowledge, because for years now, since I was in the seminary more than 30 years ago, or around 30 years ago, there have been all kinds of lawsuits and things of whether you could have the 10 Commandments, for example, in front of the city hall or in a courtroom or justice building. And so there's all kinds of ideas that this is in some quarters, this is considered a violation of church and state and these types of things. We're not going to get into that, but we're just saying that we recognize the importance from a spiritual standpoint. So I'm just going to read this first paragraph, and then we'll go ahead and jump right into them. The 10 Commandments are a series of religious and moral imperatives that are recognized as a moral foundation for the faithful. The commandments form part of a covenant offered by God to the Israelites to free them from the spiritual slavery of sin. According to the Catechism of the Catholic Church, the commandments are considered essential for spiritual good health and growth, and serve as a basis for Catholic social teaching. A review of the commandments also serves as a guide for one's examination of conscience prior to celebrating the sacrament of penance. And we have a session in February on the sacrament of penance. I have the schedule for February that we'll review at the end of this session. One of the things you may know, especially those of you who have been brought up in another congregation, another Christian group, that is there's even a little different division. Now again, in the original manuscripts of the Bible, one thing, there's not chapters and verses that are identified. That came much later. And then even things such as the commandments, they're not numbered. So the Catholic Church has a traditional listing of the commandments, and the Protestant version came after the time of the Reformation. So I'm just saying, if you go into First Baptist or First Presbyterian or something like that, you'll see what I would call the Protestant version. Even some of the ones that have been in controversy and public property and those types of things, you'll see usually the Protestant version. And these go back to Deuteronomy chapter 5, Moses on the mountain. And I always like that description. They were inscribed by the finger of God. If you've ever seen a stone carver, they have to work very hard to carve these things into stone with hammer and chisel and whatever they had in those days. But like now, when you go to a bank or something or other and you can sign with your finger, well, that's how God made the Ten Commandments, inscribed with his finger. So it's really something very special, if you can imagine the granite or whatever stone it was that God wrote these. Decalogue means 10, so that's where that word comes from. I am the Lord your God. You shall not have strange gods before me. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. Remember to keep holy the Lord's day. Honor your father and your mother. You shall not kill. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife. You shall not covet your neighbor's goods. Now, just as a note, the Protestant version usually breaks the first commandment into two. And that throws the numbering off going down there, and then combines 9 and 10 into one. So just as a little background there. I have a little bit of, and if you have a question or a comment, just raise your hand and I'll get to you. So the first one, I am the Lord your God. You don't have strange gods. Now again, if you read through the Old Testament, you'll find that there were many pagan nations around the Israelites, and also they actually fell into it as well. Really, at the time of the Ten Commandments, does anybody remember what Aaron was doing with, while Moses and Joshua were up on the mountain? What Aaron, his own brother, and the Israelites were doing in the camp? And Peggy, worshiping the golden calf. And Aaron has one of the all-time funny lines in the Bible. Moses says, "What are you doing?" He says, "Well, we just threw all this stuff in the furnace, and that's what came out. Just happened that way." The other thing that's funny about that story, again, this is very serious, to offense to God, but I'm just saying ironic, is that poor Joshua, he was young, and Moses was much more seasoned. And so Joshua says, "Oh my goodness, it sounds like there's some trouble down there in the camp." And Moses said, "No, It's not like they're being attacked or something. That's revelry, There's like having this big crazy party or something, Said, oh my goodness. Okay, so the commands for number 1, faith, hope, and love, worship of God, reverence for holy things, and prayer. I don't think anybody would argue with that. I am the Lord your God, our Creator, our Redeemer, our Sanctifier, and that's who we have our loyalty to. There's only room in the human heart for one sovereign Lord. And so who will we worship? Forbids idolatry, again, golden calf or anything else. Superstition. That's a good one, because what's an example of a superstition? What do you have an idea? What would be an example of that? Say that again. Walking under a ladder. Mm-hmm. Now again, there might be, if there's a paint can on there or something or other, there's some things we can do that are out prudential, but not to think that there's some kind of curse or some kind of omen or something like that. What would, has anybody ever heard of a Ouija board? Is that superstitious? Yes. I mean, it's like say somebody, about to take a seat here. What if someone had a question about work or something like that? Should I get another job or whatever? So, well, instead of spending time here maybe in a chapel in prayer, meditation, reading scripture, doing some consultation, practical things, saying, well, I should contact the Ouija board and see if some spirit can, you're opening a door to evil when things like that, or even a medium. I met a woman when I was a seminarian, and I think the pastor was scared of her. He sent me over to talk to her. She had spent, I think, a large fortune in consulting psychics that would go into a trance. She told me some of these stories, and they were very interesting stories on one topic, almost like watching something on television. But I would never recommend that anybody do that. She had, and part of it is, and again, I'm not saying that some of the psychics might really be sincere in their thing, but she thought that her aunt who helped raise her had been reincarnated into a little girl in Mexico, and she's trying to, so she would contact psychics trying to get, again, I would never recommend that anybody get involved in any type of thing like that. Mediums, that's what is spiritism, getting into some of these New Age or all these types of things. It's better left alone, just better to leave it all alone. Tempting God, that's in the Catechism there. It goes against the sense of reverence or sovereignty. Sacrilege. Sacrilege is against sanctity. One of the, like we have a chalice that we use at the Mass. It'd be like saying, well, I'm just going to bring this chalice down to the brewery, something that's consecrated for sacred use. It's not intended for that. Attendance at false worship. If someone were to say, well, we're going to, I'll just use something crazy, we're going to a temple where there's a sports car in the middle of the temple instead of the tabernacle, and we're all going to bow down to this car or something, just something totally crazy, but there's parallels on there. So no, that would be considered false worship. Take the name of the Lord, do not take the name of the Lord in vain. I used to work for a shipyard, and there was a lot of bad language overall. And I think that, and I was an observer. I was a young engineer working at a big shipyard, and some of the seasoned people. I think that some of them, their language was habit, 100%. They'd say it before they ever even realized it. And the difference between a virtue and a virtue is a good habit, and a vice is a bad habit. So again, there are people that use these things as a vice. It's a bad habit, bad language, using the Lord's name in vain. And even we had somebody, not in this parish, I was in a parish in Charlotte, and it was the same type of thing. We had 2 confessionals like we have here. Well, he was working on one, he was a contractor, working on one of the confessional doors, but he was inside the church, like on this side of the door. And I was doing something in the church. I said, wait a minute, the problem is not on that door, but it's on the other door. And he used the name of the Lord in vain. I said, sir, you're in church. That's not the type of language that we use in the church, I said, what? And I told his supervisor, the project manager, said, that's not the best thing to do, It's not good business practice anyway, but certainly not in church. So again, don't get into a bad habit that way. Reverence in speaking about God and holy things. The keeping of oaths and vows. Very good. Blasphemy. Again, blasphemy is basically anything against the sacred. And there's different expressions. Jesus was accused of blasphemy by saying God was his father, his personal father. But there's more to it than just that. It can be any type of thing that's against sanctity, against the faith. Irreverent use of God's name, contempt for God. Hopefully, anybody who has contempt for God will repent from that and recognize. Like say somebody has a bad experience, recognizing that God didn't cause this. I'll give you an example. One of my best friends when I was growing up, his father just got bought a new car, and their house was up on top of a hill. Well, the father drove his new car up this real steep driveway in front of the garage and went into the house. I think it was his first straight drive in a long time. So he left the car in neutral and did not set the parking brake and went into the house. A little while later, the car rolled backwards down a driveway, across the street, into the woods, and backed into a tree. And my friend told me his first reaction was, why has God done this to me? Now I think it's pretty clear who was at fault there, Leave the car in gear or set the parking brake. It wasn't that God caused gravity, but God made the universe, but God didn't make that car roll down the hill. But even things on a health thing, there's no guarantees that any of us are not going to get sick in some way. But we trust in providence and really trust in God's mercy, but not to curse God if you get sick or something like that. Speaking disrespectfully of holy things, false oaths, and breaking of vows. Perjury, therefore, would fall under that. Making a promise of truth, especially in a courtroom, even on the sacred scriptures, and putting that aside. Keep holy the Lord's day. Now again, this is one that, remember in Genesis, God created the heavens and the earth in 6 days and rested on the seventh day, the Sabbath. In the early church, because Sunday, the first day, is the day of the resurrection. That's when the church came together for the celebration of the Eucharist. Now, there's this kind of a overlap type thing from the synagogue to eventually Christian Eucharist, but what we have in the church is the Lord's Day. Sunday is the day of the resurrection and also the day of Pentecost as well. So for us, in our teaching, participation in the Mass on Sundays, which actually begins with the vigil, Saturday night, and on holy days of obligation. Of course, there's exceptions to that. If someone has the flu, has a virus, or even if we were snowed in or ice or whatever, there are exceptions to that. Or if you're caring for a loved one who's ill. But the point is to make that a priority. Make it a priority. Even if you're traveling on vacation, just to do your best to try to find a Mass. The forbidden, missing the Mass through one's own fault. Or I would say even not only one's fault, but one's decision. Like say, some things, I got somebody in town with a boat, we're going to go to the lake that day. No, to try to say, okay, let me go to the 8 o'clock Mass and then we'll join you at the lake, to make things a proper priority. And then unnecessary servile work. And so there is the sense that we get from the Old Testament of a good time to rest, a good time for families, a good time for kind of prayer, relaxation, kind of recuperation. Nobody can go 24/7 all the time. Tracy tries to. I'm just kidding. But we do have to have our time of rest. And so for us, it is. Now, for me, I was on the job last Sunday 14 hours. I unlocked the church at 7 a.m., and I locked the office after parish council at 9:15, over 14 hours later. So Sunday is usually a busy day for me. It won't be as busy this coming Sunday. Honor thy father and thy mother, number 4. When I was in the seminary, there were a lot of shrines. It was a Benedictine monastery, and there were a lot of shrines all throughout the area and on campus and nearby. And there was a family that came to see me, a husband and wife, and their 4 children. So I took them over to the shrine of St. Joseph, and where one of the monks had carved this big wooden statue of St. Joseph and the child Jesus. I mean, it was really a great work of art. And the little lad, Jesus, was holding a plaque, and on the plaque was IV. So this family, looking at me, I was in about my second year of seminary or so, as being the tour guide. Mark, what does that IV stand for? So I thought it was an abbreviation. So I was really scrambling, trying to find out what words that IV could fit in there. And I wasn't really coming up with anything that really seemed logical. So I finally gave up. A few days later, I saw one of the old monks that I knew in the dining hall. And I said, I was out there at the shrine of St. Joseph. What does that IV stand for? He looked at me and kind of shook his head. It's not a word. Those are numbers, Roman numerals. So it was a Roman numeral 4, referring to the 4th commandment. So Jesus, in this plaque, this artistic rendering here, he's recognizing the importance to honor your father and your mother. Joseph, of course, not his biological father, but his stepfather, and Mary. So anyway, that was I'll show you my. It took me a while to get started in ministry. I think now, and you see here, I made these Roman numerals here on the left there, just so to remind me about that. Just to say, I can never reveal a confession or a penitent, but I can say that there are times, or have been times, where I have reminded a penitent of the fourth commandment, especially maybe in those teenage years, and there's a little friction and a little independence with the kids and those types of things. But I remind them, you don't have to agree 100%, but you have to honor your father and your mother. And honor means respect, good communication. Don't raise your voice. Don't slam the door. Don't do something out of spite. And so all of these things. So obedience, care on the part of the parents for the spiritual and temporal welfare of their children, and obedience to civil or religious superiors. So even a student in a classroom should have respect and goodwill to the teacher. Hatred of parents and superiors, disrespect, disobedience. One of the saddest things as a pastor that I learn of is where there's great division in families. And it's very sad. I was at the cemetery about a month or two ago, and I didn't know the woman who had died. I was there just to do a blessing at the columbarium, and there were only a few people there. One of them was her nephew, came down from the north. Well, anyway, a car pulled into the parking lot right before we got started, and one of the women that was there thought that it was the woman's daughter. She says, well, I think that's her daughter. So I said, well, that's nice. Her daughter's coming to see for her mother's graveside blessing. And she says, if that's her, I'm calling the police. I said, oh my goodness, we're going to have a standoff at a cemetery? And apparently that the mother and daughter had this estrangement and or whatever. There was some, I didn't understand the whole thing, but it turns out it wasn't the woman's daughter. But I mean, it was just saying, oh my goodness. The person said, I'm going to call the police if that's her daughter. Oh my goodness. But anyway, the commandment is to do your best to get along with family. Thou shalt not kill. And I remember when I was studying Scripture, because in the Old Testament, there is an allowance for self-defense and also an allowance for service. You know, it's like service in the military. And it can be very dangerous at times. The scholar that we had said that if you really translated that accurately, it would say, you shall not murder. Because murder is the deliberate taking of a life, and not in a sense of war. You don't call somebody in a war if they're in defensive, a murderer. But a murder is a deliberate taking of the life of someone who's innocent. And so anyway, we have this in the Catechism, thou shalt not kill, but that's kind of the context. Commands safeguarding one's own life and the bodily welfare and that of others. Again, even in the sense of war, there is a moral obligation to protect a weaker person from a stronger person. In a sense, if you're going somewhere and you don't even know the situation, but you see a bigger person attacking a weaker person, say a woman or a child, that you have a moral obligation to try to help the poor person, the weaker one. The church usually refers to this as you would start at the minimum of force. Like if you could stop the aggressor by wounding the person, that would be the best step first. In other words, like in these action movies, they always shoot to kill. It's saying like, no, if you can shoot to injure or in some way help that would be your first step. Killing someone would be only if that's the last resort. it's one of these things. Most of us hope we're never in such a situation anyway. And I used to think about that, like when my father was alive, my father or my mother or my sister, that when it comes to your family, you certainly want to protect your family from an aggressor. But again, most of us would hope that it won't ever come to that. Forbids unjust killing. Suicide, again, thou shalt not kill. We know that in the mental illness is very sad, but if anything we can do to help people to get to a good mental state, it's very sad. We had a funeral here in the church in November of a young person who took his own life, and again, we can only say the person was suffering from something we don't understand. Abortion, again, there's innocence in the womb. Sterilization, dueling. I was at an auction or something. Somebody was telling me about that there was these pistols for dueling. I don't know that I want to buy those anyway, but the whole thing of dueling, there was a special rule in the church, going back to like the Revolutionary period or somewhere in there, that no, Catholic gentlemen shouldn't be involved in dueling. Endangering life and limb of self or others without just cause. I was thinking about that. Did anybody ever see the movie about the tragedy on Mount Everest? It was really a well-done movie, but these mountain climbers were on top of the mountain and a tremendous storm came in, and it was very sad. And one of the guides, who was an experienced climber, but he was trying to help other people, and he had a satellite radio. His wife was pregnant in Australia, and so he was on the top of the mountain and he wasn't going to make it off, but he was still alive. And so they put in the radio connection, so he's talking to his wife, who was maybe about 3 or 4 months before she was going to go into labor, and he's telling her, that he won't see her again. And again, I'm not criticizing him personally or anything like that, but perhaps if your wife is pregnant, maybe you could find another line of work other than guiding people on Mount Everest, which is pretty dangerous, So again, we all have our hobbies and different things, but again, we shouldn't put ourselves at unnecessary risk. I mean, I'm a cyclist, and I know there's some certain dangers in bicycle riding, but again, within reason, so to speak. I rode yesterday indoors, so that's a little bit safer. Shall not commit adultery. Number 6, of course, and within number 6, kind of all of the sins against chastity. And chastity certainly just simply means purity. Purity in words, in thoughts, and in actions. Forbids obscene speech, suggestive movies, programs, books, internet sites. We all know that the internet can be a great blessing for study, for research, even for spirituality, for spiritual growth. But there is, of course, a dark side of the internet. We're all aware of that. And people sometimes can get roped in to some of these bad sites. Impure actions alone or with others. So again, all of this is within the 6th commandment. Shall not steal. Respect for the property of rights and others. The paying of just debts, paying just wages to employees, integrity in public office. Part of this things is even simple. Like if you're in a store and you pay by cash, I'm still one of the few people that probably still has a few dollars here and there. You don't have to worry about change if you do it by your card. But if somebody gives you back, for example, too much change, well, you could say, well, I'll just put that in my pocket. No, in a certain sense, that's stealing. If you know that it wasn't yours, then you should say, wait a minute, you made a mistake, and give it back. I went to this was years ago, 30 years ago or so. I was at a store, and I bought a bunch of items, little small items, and I had a tree in the cart. It was a small tree that I was going to plant in my yard. Well, I got out to my car, and I said, that wasn't as much as I thought it was. And I looked at the receipt, and she had charged me for everything except this tree. And it was right in the middle of the cart, you know. It was a big one. Well, I didn't want to put it on the counter. Well, anyway, I was in a hurry. The proper thing for me to do would have been to go in right then, say, wait a minute, I got this maple tree or whatever, but I didn't pay for it. Let me pay for it. I said, I'll just come back over here. I'm in a hurry. The next time I'm on this side of town, I'll go in there and pay for it. So about 5-6 months later, I was on that side of town. I drove by there, and the place had closed down. Hopefully not because I got that tree, you know, and didn't pay for it. Hopefully that wasn't the reason they closed down. So what I did was, in that case, I couldn't make restitution to the company because they were out of business. So I made a donation to a mission with that intention of making restitution. It would be like somebody told me once, you know, when I was like 7 years old, I stole an ice cream off the ice cream truck. You know, you can't pay the person back now, but you can at least make some restitution to charity. So again, the whole thing about stealing is it is in the realm of justice. You know, fair wages, work for pay, all of these things, integrity. I worked for the government and the Navy, working for the Department of the Navy, they had a $1 billion budget in Charleston, which is a pretty big budget, especially and this is in 1980s, so it's even, by today's dollars, even be bigger. I had co-workers that were friends of mine, and they were educated people, doing good, that would steal from the government. You know, a tool bag, tools, equipment. And I asked one guy, I said, that tool bag belongs to the government, but I'm a taxpayer. Well, you can't. Well, yeah, the taxes paying for roads, and I mean, that's not a good excuse. Go before Almighty God. Well, what about that tool bag? Well, I was a taxpayer. Well, you can't think like that. Well, that's kind of making a justification for that. I heard one case that, well, I'll give you a little background. I was working on submarines, and there were very intense work on a nuclear submarine because the work never stopped. Christmas, whatever, there was always somebody working on that ship when it was in the shipyard. We went over to the pipe shop. This is like the week before Christmas. They had all of this fancy piping, and they were making chimes, not for the government, but for like Christmas presents and things. They're making these fancy chime sets that people would hang on their porch or whatnot. Over at the sheet metal shop, they were making the little shovels for your fireplace. You know, kind of like they had their own production going. And then in the carpentry shop, you ever seen those, like it's a little duck that walks across the floor, you know? They were making those in the carpentry shop. I said, is anybody here working for the Navy? Or is everybody here making their own projects, you know? The craziest one I heard, though, was, and some of these shop people were very, very good at what they did, is occasionally a truck or a car would get stopped coming out of the base, and they would look for government material. Well, the one guy, he had a nice pickup truck with the camper shell, opened it all up, they searched it and said, okay, you can leave. What he had made with government material was the camper shell, you know. They were looking inside the truck. What he had stolen was on top of it, you know. It's just like, oh my goodness. So anyway, the thou shalt not steal covers a big basis there. Even as it has here in the forbidden, even cheating someone. And what's amazing is you look back in the Bible, is that the book of, where it says, you have fixed your scales for cheating. This isn't anything new. Can you imagine that? Thousands of years ago at some farmer's market, they had rigged the scales to give false weights on there. And it's amazing. So it's not anything new. I got scammed here. I bought a kayak a couple years ago. So I went online. I wanted to get what they call the kayak caddy. It's like two wheels, and then it hooks on so I can pull my kayak around, and wheel it around. And they were about $40, $45. Well, I saw one online for $25. And I said, well, that's a pretty good buy. So I'm going to get that one. So I ordered, and I got an email. Yes, your product will be sent out, in the next 2 weeks. And I never got it. And I went back and looked back, tried to send an email. The company did not exist. They put up this whole ad, this whole thing. Fortunately, they could have charged my credit card more. All they charged was the $25. So I said, first thing I did was cancel the card. But I kind of got lucky that's all I lost was the $25. But the whole thing is there are dishonest people out there. And so again, they're in violation of the seventh commandment if they're doing that. Bear false witness, truthfulness, respect for the good name of others, observance of secrecy when required. I think we all know there's some people out there that can't keep a secret, but I think it was St. Francis de Sales, kind of a rumors type, thing. This is several hundred years ago, where I can't remember the exact story, but I'll make my version of it. It was something like somebody is plucking the feathers out of a chicken, and the wind is blowing, so all these feathers are blowing all over the place, and he said, well, go back and collect all of those feathers. So, well, you can't. They're all blown all over. Well, that's the whole sense of a rumor. Somebody says a rumor, and they tell somebody else, and it gets all blown out of proportion and all these things. You can't really reel it all back in. Injury to the good name or reputation of others, slander, rash judgment. Rash judgment, you don't even have to say anything. That could be in your own mind. I'll tell a true confession on rash judgment. Years ago, I was in a parish, and we had a new roof put on the church. Well, right after all the workers had left, about a day or two later, I got in my truck, and I had a flat tire. This is what rash judgment. My rash judgment was that they had dropped a roofing nail by the carport, and they missed it, and I drove over it and had a flat tire. So my rash judgment was instant anger that I had this flat tire because of the roofers. It wasn't until I took the tire off and examined it and all that to realize there was no nail in it. It was just a bad tire. But my rash judgment was that it was somebody else's fault. So again, it's always better to think things through before making a rash judgment. I had a father one time tell me in the parish that, like, say his kids, just say they borrowed a tool or something to work on their bike or something or another and couldn't find it. That was his conclusion. And then he would find where he had put it somewhere, and said, it's kind of hard to apologize to your kids sometimes, but it is, because he'd say, you lost my screwdriver or something or other, but really they didn't, So again, if you do make a rash judgment and you say it, to apologize for that. Not covet thy neighbor's wife. And again, this is, I think, is pretty much self-explanatory. I guess you can make that inclusive just to say spouse, husband or wife. And again, this even just goes into thoughts, not even saying you're ever going to say anything to another person's spouse, but to have virtuous thoughts. Willful, impure thoughts and desires, which would be forbidden. And then also thy neighbor's goods. Respect the property rights of others. Forbids the desire to take, to keep, or damage the property of others. Even in a sense, not to be resentful. I was at my home parish, and I saw this really nice car. And it turns out my brother knows the owner of it. It's called a Genesis GT, I think. Goes 130 miles an hour or something like that. Again, not to be resentful. Why can't I have that? No, the whole thing is, I usually have had clunkers and things. So again, just to not covet thy neighbor's goods. When I was in college, and my father was a chemical engineer, I'm studying mechanical engineering, and I had this real nice notebook that had graph paper inside of it, and it had a nice folder, and on the cover, it had engineering written right on the cover. And I came home from college and showed it to my dad, and the first thing he said is, "I covet this." Just joking. "I covet this." "Well, Dad, you're not supposed to covet my notebook here." So these are the 10 Commandments and an application of them for all of us. And I've put in a couple of my own examples there. Are there any comments on these, or any insights, or anything you would like to add? Yes.
Just due to the nature of my life, I wind up with a lot of people who are admittedly breaking it. They know they're breaking these things, particularly the thou shalt not steal. I suppose, where does enabling?
It's a good question for those on our streaming, especially, and for those maybe in the back didn't hear the comment, was if you're in a certain field of some kind of jurisdiction, it could be an accountant, an attorney, a business partner, or something else. If somebody is stealing or improper business practices or things like that, where does your line need to be from a moral standpoint? And that's actually, each person has to make some sense of conscience of that. I'll share, when I was working years ago, I met somebody who was a very good mechanic, and he was working for a major car dealer, and the boss told him, if somebody comes in to get their brakes checked, even if the brakes are good and they'll last a long time, go ahead and change everything on them. And again, it wasn't so much for their view of safety, but more their sense of their profits. And he told me that he, as a Christian, he was not Catholic, he was a Protestant. He says, I couldn't do that. I couldn't basically gouge the customer by putting parts on that were not warranted. In certain fields, there are people that struggle with these types of questions of improper billing of people, or moral questions. It's not an easy dilemma, because sometimes people's livelihood depends on their providing for the family and things like that. I was translating for a person once for social services. The person was hoping to get some social service benefits, and I knew that she was lying because I'd been to her home, and I knew that she was lying about certain things. But I was not the liar, I was a translator. But I wasn't even really comfortable even translating a lie. So there are some tough dilemmas and tough situations. Ultimately, Some people have to just remove themselves from a situation, or what's that term like like defer? Defer this to someone, to step back, basically to someone else. Everybody is entitled to, fair process. And I know you have a lot of experience in the legal field. Even in the legal field, there are some, people are entitled to a free and fair representation and all of these things. So it's tough, but I think everybody has to perhaps sometimes struggle with some of the questions of morality. It's the same as like in sports. I used to always follow the Tour de France. Lance Armstrong, here an American who won the race 7 times in a row, which was unprecedented. And then it turns out that he had been using performance-enhancing drugs, and not only him, but some of his teammates as well. And then finally, some of the teammates came out and said, we had a guilty conscience about this. Even if it's not enough to say, well, somebody else is doing it, but if there are certain rules of the game, you should be following the rules of the game. So again, some people struggle with what's going on. It could not just in a bike race, but even in a company, that there's things going on that a person is not comfortable with what's going on in the company. Could be even a sense, we've had these over the years, of like pollution and things that people knew about, but they were trying to get away with it. It's a tough thing. Anybody else have any experience on that? Like, what if you're part of some business practice or some immoral judgment or something? How do you respond? Or what's your, Chris there? Mm-hmm. Yeah, the comment for everyone is like a tyrannical regime, like a tyrant. And if you are an official in that administration or some things, how do you, what's the best way? And sometimes you really need the wisdom of God to think about such things. There's a lot in there. I know we have people with experience in racing around here, and I have talked to racers where what if the racer team or things are doing things that are not right, things that are, what are some ways to respond to that? I've often wondered, because the thing about a dictator, a tyrant, is often using intimidation or fear to get the submission of those also who have responsibility. And so, again, we're not going to judge people for their lack of courage or whatever, but again, usually they have to have some cooperation with others. We certainly could say that in the Second World War, where not only Hitler and Stalin, but there were people that were certainly bad, but they had other collaborators, so to speak, people that bought into the idea, or even were just like, again, submission in fear. Well, this isn't good, but what's going to happen to me if I don't do it? Mm-hmm. Okay, just in the last part here, a Pharisee asked Jesus the following question: "Teacher, which commandment in the law is the greatest?" Now again, the Pharisee is looking at the whole Old Testament, where there are hundreds of precepts. Some you shall do and some things you shall not do. Everything dietary, community, work, labor, all these things. Jesus' response, and he's quoting from Deuteronomy and Leviticus. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. Pretty much with everything that you have. This is the greatest and first, the love of God. The second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. The whole law and the prophets depend on these two commandments. So in a certain sense, the way I refer to this is like a mission statement. And even companies now, parishes, the dioceses, but even companies for profit have mission statements that is, in a certain sense, a concise summary of the goal, of the mission. For Christianity, we can look at those two great commandments, the love of God and love of neighbor. That's, in a certain sense, the mission statement. You keep those two things in front of you and in practice, then that will guide you for other decisions that you have to make. Now, we have just a minute left, so we have the schedule for February. And again, I'm hoping that everybody can participate throughout the month, because these are building one on top of another. So we will be joined with the wisdom and experience of Deacon John 1 week from today. Well, I'd have to put it into divine inspiration here. And I appreciate your attention here. Now again, this is an invitation for you to look up those questions and those statements in the UCAT book, or also you can look at the Catechism if you really want to get a complete and thorough description of each commandment and the kind of the unfolding of the responsibilities or application for Christian life. And we do have some other things we do have to look at. So for those who are being confirmed, has everyone given me their baptismal certificate? Well, we're going to talk about yours too. I think I have most of them, right? And how many have never been baptized? Okay, never been baptized. Wonderful. Well, you know what that means. You get all your sins washed away. Well, our prayers are with all of you, and certainly keep our parishioners in your prayers. We've had about 10 deaths this month, which is much higher than normal in our parish. Had funerals the last 2 days, and another funeral tomorrow, and then at least 3 next week. So it's been a busy thing. At least our parochial vicar is due back on Monday. So we'll at least get another priest here after his month-long vacation to his home country, which if you're going to go that far, you might as well go for as long as you can. Okay? All right. Well, peace be with you, and we'll look forward to the month of February, which again is getting closer and closer to Lent, and of course to the rites of initiation. Okay? Thank y'all. God bless. Hello.